Welcome to Demystifying Data Analytics Workshop. This is going to be led by one of our alumni, Alex Ellis. He is a senior manager at Universal Music Group, works on multiple projects in the Process Innovation and Advanced Operations Division, which just is super fancy sounding, and I want to hear more about that, but you'll have to say a little something because I want to know what that means. I don't know what that means. What does that mean, Alex? So yeah, Alex is our wonderful facilitator this evening, and I will just hand this over to you, Alex, and take it away.
All right, sounds good, Zach. Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody being on the Zoom meeting with me today. So today we are going to talk about demystifying data analytics. And the reason that I put predicting the future in the title is because this is the way that I primarily look at DA or data analytics. I'm going to probably use that acronym interchangeably throughout this presentation. So if I say DA, just realize it means data analytics. So I say that because I analyze data and I gain insights. And then these insights then become information that I can use to make future decisions, which in return allows my risk to be lessened significantly, assuming that I'm asking the right questions, I'm truly understanding the data that I'm analyzing, and if I'm not massaging the outcome or making assumptions in my analysis to fit an underlying assumption. So this is all we're going to talk about today. It's going to be awesome. I'm very excited that you guys are here. And as Zach had mentioned, if you have any questions throughout this, feel free to pop it in the chat, and when I get to a stopping point, I'll address the questions as they come across. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Here is the agenda. First off, we're going to start with data is everywhere. So right now, I'm creating data for Google by using this Google slide deck. Right now, all of us are actively creating data for Zoom by being in this workshop. Whenever your phone makes a noise and you open up the app that orchestrated that noise and you take some action within the app, you're creating data for the developers of that app. So in this section, we'll gain an understanding of the endless amount of data that is consistently being generated. And then you'll gain an appreciation of how important it is to truly understand how data is being created and what data is available. And then next up, we're going to jump into data analytics is boring. I think this is, to the common person, this is probably their interpretation of data analytics, but I would argue that they truly don't understand the power in DA. And so in this section, we'll take a look at data analytics from a different perspective. We'll run through an example, and running through that example will hopefully assist in our understanding of the topic. Then we'll jump into KPIs, so key performance indicator. Understanding KPIs and how to create them is a very important skill set to develop if you want to perform effective analysis that results in useful information. So in this section, we'll discuss all things KPI. In section 4, we'll run through the data analytics or data analysis process, and you'll see it from start to finish, and we'll use an example to kind of really drill that process home. Then in section 5, where can I get data? So from DSPs to social media to your website, there are so many different places that you can get multiple data sets from to start your data analytics journey. And so in this section, what we'll do is we will do a brief dive into different platforms that provide you with data. And we'll also discuss a few things to consider when you're collecting your data. And then section 6, I am bad at math. I'm not great at math, but I can tell you if you're terrible at math, that is not a problem at all. There are so many digital tools out there at our disposal. So in this section, we'll go through and review some of these useful tools so you don't need to remember to carry the one. And then in section 7, we will wrap up the workshop today. I'm going to walk you through how to build your own data analytics template through the use of a very popular KPI that I see musicians use all the time. And then like Zach had mentioned earlier, at the very end, we will open it up to a full Q&A. Okay, you guys ready? Here we go. Data is everywhere. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys a question here. Feel free to respond in the chat, say it out loud, however you guys want to do it. So I'm curious, have any of you done any of the following things today? Have you performed a Google search?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, okay. Have you checked social media?
Yes.
Have you, yeah, absolutely, huh? See, there you go, 2 for 2 right now. Have you used your phone to get you from point A to point B? Have you used GPS in your phone? Sure, we all have there. Have we asked Google, Alexa, or Siri anything today? Have we asked any type of voice activation? Now, if you haven't done any of those, I guarantee you've done this. You've probably streamed some type of media online. And so the reason that I am asking you this question is because data is everywhere. It truly is. It's estimated that there's about 80,000 Google searches per second on average. And that equates to about, 7 billion searches per day and about 2 trillion searches per year worldwide. Now, if you're like me, I really want to see the proof. So I did this quick search here, and I want to share this with you guys. This is a quick calculator showing you how many Google searches occurred today. So as of right now, 5.4 billion Google searches have occurred today. And if we take a look at how many Google searches are occurring each second, right there, 92,000 gigabits of internet traffic is happening every second. So that's, to me, that's pretty crazy, right? And so I say all that, right, because there's so many Google searches being created, and every time a Google search is done, there's data being generated, right? So let's take this one step further. Let's start talking about social media. It's estimated that the average person spends about 144 minutes per day on social media. So that equates to about 2 hours and 24 minutes per day. And this number, as we all know, is actively increasing, right? Because there's a lot of new developers coming up with social media sites. A lot of existing social media developers are figuring out what keeps people within their platform for an extended period of time. And on top of that, the older generation is starting to get hip to social media, starting to use it a lot more. So again, this is just continuously generating data. So let's talk about YouTube now, right? It's crazy that YouTube, there's 300 hours of content uploaded to YouTube per minute. And then in return, there's 5 billion videos to watch per day, right? And that's pretty nuts, because every time a video is uploaded, every time a video is watched, right, data is being created. And if we talk about our industry, it's estimated that the average user of Spotify spends about 25 hours per month listening to music, and about 44% of Spotify's user base is using that app on a daily basis. And that's pretty nuts. That's almost half the people that have the Spotify app are using that app on a daily basis. And so that's generating data as well, right? So we take a look at Google, all the information, all the data that's being generated there, social media, YouTube, Spotify, and you can really start to appreciate the massive amount of data that's getting generated right now. So let's take a step back. Let's talk about before digital data was really being generated, before internet connectivity was a pretty common thing, before streaming music. Think about when we lived in the analog world and you went to a store and you bought a CD, or if you're old school like me, maybe you bought a cassette tape. Once you left that store, the artist management, the label, they had no clue what you did with that content. They don't know if you handed it to your friend to take a listen to, if you maybe just threw it away once you left to prove some type of point. They had no idea. But now, with all this data being generated and a lot of different data sets being available, now people are starting to gain an understanding about fans, customers, users' habits at a very, very deeper level, which again is very, very important information for your business or your brand. So if you understand how data is being created, then you really understand the types of inputs you can potentially use for your data analysis, right? So let's take a quick look at an example here, right? This example is, did the talent buyer I emailed listen to my latest single on SoundCloud? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to do a very quick data analysis on this front end. So if you want to find the answer to that question, my brain goes to the very first question: is data being created? So I would ask first, okay, what was in the email? If you sent them an email that had a tracking URL embedded into it, then data was created. Now, if the talent buyer, perhaps they opened your email, they got a phone call, but they were impressed with the way that you worded your email, so they were distracted. And then they got on Instagram, ended up checking you out, and then they ended up on your SoundCloud page to stream your song. So you do not have any idea that those actions occurred, even if you had that tracking URL in your email. I guess you could say that maybe no one clicked it, but you saw your streams go up in SoundCloud. But essentially what you would need to do at that point, if you weren't seeing data come in from that tracking URL, is you probably want to cross-reference your Instagram data, right? And then maybe see if you can gain some insights on that. But that all really depends on the data that Instagram gives us. And so if you recall, there were two questions, right? Did the talent buyer see my email, click the URL, and then did they stream my song? So another point that I'd want to make here is, okay, what if you embedded the song on a brand new EPK page that you created on your website and you cleared the play count? If you did that and you only sent that tracking URL to that talent buyer, then you would have a one-for-one correlation if you saw the URL being clicked and then you saw the embed on your website being streamed, right? That's a direct correlation. That's you setting up the breadcrumbs to help you analyze the data on the back end. But there's a lot of other things that might have happened in between those particular steps, right? Another approach you could have taken is if you essentially set up a private instance of the song on SoundCloud, clear the counts, and then only shared it with a talent buyer. So what I'm kind of explaining here right now is thinking about how you want to set up your data on the front end to analyze on the back end. Because as you'll see throughout this workshop, there's going to be a lot of missing pieces. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to make underlying assumptions if you can't clearly see a connection. So you always want to try to, when you're thinking about data analytics, you always want to try to create breadcrumbs for yourself when you start thinking about it on the front end. So again, really, understanding how data is being generated is extremely important. And hopefully, at this point in the presentation, you've gained an understanding or an appreciation, at least, for how data is being generated and how it directly correlates to your data analysis, right? So if we didn't set up the different specific data points on the front end to be analyzed on the back end, then we might never get the true answer to our question. So I think that here's another different way of thinking about data sets, right? I think that Digital Music News did a really good job of rolling the two different types of data sets up. So the first here is direct signals or direct data, right? This essentially, you start a band, you start building a following on Instagram, you put your songs up online, and then you can see all of that data come directly to you, right? You can see your likes go up, you can see your views go up, you can see your streams go up. So that's direct data that you're seeing. But then there's also indirect data signals, right? So an indirect data signal would be when, say, someone sees your post and they reshare your post, and then one of their followers sees that post and they reshare it, and so on and so forth, right? So this can happen on social media sites, on websites. It can also happen on torrents and through outright privacy. So different ways of thinking about data sets, the direct data and the indirect data. And we're getting a lot more, we're advancing a lot more in the data generation category, because now you can start seeing data on reshares. And so really kind of sky's the limit at this point. But these are right now, probably for me, these are the most clearest ways to think about the two different types of data sets. So we get it, right? I think that most of us are starting to more clearly understand that with the rise in technology, some government intervention, and our changing views on privacy versus convenience, that anytime we interact with digital devices or tools, data is being collected. Now, more importantly, is really understanding how data is being used and how it's being analyzed. We're all probably familiar at this point, while social media sites and certain apps are free, right? These companies create a very long and confusing end user agreement that a lot of us just simply click OK on, and then this allows them to sell our data to advertisers, giving them revenue, and then keeping the cycle going. Now, I mentioned that not to scare you, although taking a quick side note, I would definitely suggest that you take the time to read through at least one end user agreement and consider what your privacy is actually worth. But why I'm mentioning that is because it should be invigorating you to the world of data analytics, right? Now that we have a lot of data that is consistently being generated, we just saw it earlier, right? So much data is being generated by the millisecond that as a business or a brand, this is a game changer, because now we can better understand our users, our customers, our fans' habits, at a significantly deeper level. And this ultimately results in less guessing and more profit. So I wanted to bring up a point here that data by itself is not enough, right? Think about it like this. I asked the question earlier, did anybody use their GPS in their phone today? Well, assuming that you did use it today, maybe you made a trip to Starbucks, right? So if I have GPS data, just GPS data on your trip to Starbucks, that does not tell me much about your behavior. But if I can correlate that data with other information, such as how often you visit Starbucks, what time you usually visit the store's location, what your typical drink order is, assuming that you pre-ordered your drink in the app so you didn't have to wait, you could just walk in and pick it up. Oh, and if you use that app, I probably know what your birth date is as well. And that app's probably going to also tell me if you made any other purchases outside of your normal drink order, right? So when I have all these different data sets and I can start to correlate them, then I can really start to understand your habits. And at that point, I can start to suggest not only Starbucks products to you, right, additional Starbucks products, but I can start to suggest to you other products that users with your similar behavior or taste have purchased. So, right, having just the data alone isn't enough, but having multiple data sets and making that correlation, right, that's where we start turning this data into power through data analytics, right? That is the power of data analytics. You're taking all of this data, you're consolidating it, you're cleaning it up, you're analyzing it, and then you're interpreting it, right? That is the power of data analytics, right? Turning data into information. If you're going to take away one or two things from this presentation, that's one of the main points I want you to take away. That data on its own is not enough. Data needs to be turned into information, and it's done that, or data is done on that through the use and through the purpose of data analytics. So at this point, I'm going to take a drink of water and get a little bit of cotton mouth, but I want you guys to put in the chat, do you guys, DA, have you guys done any data analysis? Do you have any experience with it? I'm just curious. Yes, yes. Oh, okay. You guys are pros. That's awesome. I believe so, question mark. I'm sure you probably have no experience. Okay. Okay, cool. So it looks like we're a little bit across the board. Trying to see. Yeah, perfect. I think that's a great point. There's so much data that we just talked about. There's so much data available. It can get very, like, you can go into paralysis very, very quickly, very, very quickly. So hopefully through the use of this presentation, by the end, you'll understand that it's, even though it's intimidating, it'll be a lot of fun for you and very, very telling. Okay, with Power BI. Oh, someone here's a Power user. Okay. Okay, data analytics is boring. It is not boring. It is not boring. Although I can understand that it's easy to really just kind of sign off data analytics, kind of write it off, right? Because data, not a very sexy word. Analytics, it doesn't sound very interesting at all. So, if you're not a fan of math or statistics, I get it. These words aren't going to excite you. However, even if you aren't a fan of math or statistics, I would challenge you to not place your focus on the setup of data analytics, which means like getting the data and then cleaning it, consolidating it, and then running analysis or running algorithms. What I would encourage you to do is focus on the art form. Yes, this is an art form. And the art really comes into play when you're determining the right combination of data sets to use to answer your underlying question. And the art also comes in when you're developing the right question to ask. So your ultimate goal in data analysis is to analyze the full picture, right? Not just a portion of it. And you also want to be careful, again, I'm going to say this probably multiple times throughout the presentation, to not massage the data, right? Slice and dice it, not to try to make some comparisons under an assumption. And data analytics should be completely unbiased. And you'll get better at this over time because it's an art, right? More time we do something, we always get better at it. So don't let that scare you, let that invigorate you. Really, because, like I've been saying this whole time, data analytics at its core is a super simple concept. You start with a question, You identify, extract, and analyze data, and then you get an answer, right? It is that simple. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive into data sets, because like we just talked about a little bit ago, there's so much data out there. You really need to understand how these different data sets play their roles in data analysis. And because you're always going to want to perform your analysis with the richest data set possible to help you paint the full picture so you can see everything, right? Not just a little section of it. So what I want to do here is I want you to think about data analytics as different members of a band. So a band makeup, let's say, could look like this, a three-piece. You have a vocalist. Let's say that vocalist represents social media data, right? Your social media data set. So any type of data you can get from Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, any social media site. Then let's say your guitar player. Your guitar player represents your streaming data set. So any types of data you can get from Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, Hulu, any of the streaming sites. And then your drummer, who we have right here, has got a cigarette in his mouth. He's looking pretty hardcore. Let's say your drummer represents your sales data set, right? So any sales that you've made from streaming, from DSPs, any digital downloads, any physical sales, or perhaps any sales data from collaborations that you've made where you handed off the financial portion of that collaboration to your partner. So at this point, right, I'd argue that as a three-piece, the DA crew is going to sound pretty awesome on their own, right? But if we added a bassist and a pianist to this group, I then argue that you have more musicians contributing their inspiration, sound, and playing style, resulting in the group having a significantly richer sound, right? So now we add the bass. The bass is going to be representative of website data. So any type of data sets you can get from your website, if you use Squarespace, Bandzoogle, Wix, Google Analytics. We'll talk about this a little bit more a little bit later, but that's another thing I want you to take away from this is if you haven't used Google Analytics and you want to get into DA, and if you're not really a big fan of the way that your website, the information, the analytics your website gives you, you can install Google Analytics on any website, and I would highly suggest that you do that. But that was a side note, so back on topic here. So then your pianist, right? Let's say that they represent email data. So any type of data sets that you can get from your email service, like MailChimp, Constant Contact, or Sendinblue. And so hopefully now you guys can see that once you have all these different data sets, social media, streaming, sales, website, email data, this is exactly how data sets correlate and are important in DA as well, right? Because if you just had your social media data set, that's going to help paint a picture of how your fan base is consuming and interacting with your social content, but that doesn't really tell you any information about the relationship between your social media and how that's affecting your streaming and sales. But once we start to enrich our data sets, right, we start to add in streaming data sets, sales data sets, website, email. Now we're starting to paint a clear picture of how our fan base is consuming and interacting with our brand, and not just the content that we put up on a specific platform. So I love examples. We're going to go through another example here. So in this particular case study, the question that we want to ask, or the question that we want the answer to is, how did my marketing campaign affect my SoundCloud streams? So let's say this was the campaign. You sent out an email blast and you used tracking URLs. You put up a splash and use tracking URLs there as well. And you also ran a campaign on Instagram yourself where you did, let's say, 7 days of different posts to produce the campaign. So we know that what is the real question that we want to ask, right? The general question is, how did my marketing campaign affect my SoundCloud streams? But I think the real question that we want to know, or some of the real questions that we want to know, were any links or content shared, right? These are those non-direct data sets that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And then how was the content consumed, right? Where was the location of the stream? What time of the day did it occur? On what digital device did it occur on? And was the song fully or partially streamed, right? These are probably some of the questions that we really want to know that will help us build to get an answer to the ultimate question of how my marketing campaign affected my SoundCloud streams. So we know that during the campaign, we used the email service. So we got to start thinking now, right? Data collection. What type of data is available from our email service? So we know that we can get data just such as successful deliveries, total email opens, total unsubscribes, click-through rates, and clicks by URL. That's a pretty rich and a pretty awesome data set. We also know that we used our website during the campaign. So what type of data set can we get from our website? Well, we can get visitor count. We can get the referral sources. We can see what the bounce rates were for any of our particular pages, specifically the page that we set up for this campaign. And then we can see all the links that were clicked, right, on our website. But if you recall, we also use tracking URLs, so we can get that data there too. And then finally, Instagram, right? We did the campaign on Instagram, so we want to add the Instagram data set into our analysis. So what kind of data can we get from Instagram? We can get post engagement, we can get profile visit, and we can get follower stats. So at this point, hopefully you guys can really see that when we had just the email data, it was good, but it was not enough to answer our ultimate question. When we started enriching our email data set with our website data set, all right, now we're starting to get a better amount and a better different types of data, but that's still not quite enough, right? Because we used Instagram as well during our campaign. So now we add in that Instagram data set, and now we are really rocking and rolling here, right? Now we've got all the data sets that took part in the campaign, and now we can really do a pretty clean analysis. So then the next step would be collecting all that data, right? So going to your website, either downloading and copying out the data, going to the email service and Instagram and doing the same thing. And go and get all your data sets. Then you are going to consolidate all your data sets. I like to use Excel. You can use Google Sheets. Any type of database or any type of spreadsheet is really good for data sets, right? So then what I would do there is I would collect all the data, and I would start hiding sets of data that I don't need. Because when you download, if data is available to be downloaded, let's say from like a social media site, they're mostly probably going to give you all the data that they have in one shot. And all that data is not going to necessarily be useful for any particular one-off analysis. So you're going to want to hide some of your data that you might get from an export. I wouldn't suggest that you delete it. We'll talk about this more a little bit later. I would just really suggest hiding it. So you've gotten all your data, you consolidated it, you've hidden what you don't need. Then I would start comparing the tracking URLs and the email data to my SoundCloud data set, website data set, and Instagram data set. I then consolidate and compare engagement across my website, Instagram, and SoundCloud. And then I would also compare fan and streaming growth or reduction on my email service, Instagram, SoundCloud, and website hits. And I realize right now I left the SoundCloud data set out of this. Yeah, you definitely want your SoundCloud data set too, right? Because that's how you're going to see if the streams went up or down. So that's the fourth piece of data set. Hopefully you guys got that. That's what we need for this as well. And so after we get done with the collection and the analysis phase, we then move into the interpretation phase, right? So you might be able to interpret things such as what platform was more effective at driving traffic to my SoundCloud, right? Which platform should I spend more or less time and money on during the next campaign, right? You're going to find out which one of these platforms did the best performance for you. And another interpretation point could be how each portion of your Instagram campaign engaged fans and which portion drove the most traffic to your SoundCloud. Because if you can really dial in and pinpoint the post that did really well, then that's probably a template that you want to reuse or reinterpret for a future campaign. And then finally, how each portion of the Instagram campaign engaged fans. Actually, that's what we just talked about. So, the chat screen here, it's blocking me. So the point here is I want to make is that data does not equal information. That's the point I am trying to drill home here. Data on its own is great, but doesn't give you information. And data analysis, that gives you the information. And so that really is the power of DA. Okay, so now I just want to briefly talk about the industry use of DA. I'm going to give you guys a disclaimer. This doesn't, all of this comes from me reading industry blogs and industry insights. This does not come from any information from Universal. So I do know that a lot of bespoke apps are being created for artists that combine social media data and streaming data, right? Everything we're talking about in this workshop right here, a lot of apps are being created for artists. Now, I will say that it was public. Last November, Universal released an artist app for our artists as well. And so a lot of bespoke apps are starting to really come up and be useful for a lot of musicians with all of the data being generated. The industry using it for early trend spotting, right? If I have access to Shazam data and I have access to all the DSP data, I can start to see trends, right? I can start to see trends in what people are searching for, what people are listening to, what people are trying to listen to, right, through the Shazam app. And maybe I start seeing a trend overseas that I could start engaging with, right? So early trend spotting is a very, very pretty common use of DA in the industry. Analyzing fan behavior and adapting marketing strategies, right? Think about the example that we talked about a little bit earlier. In the analog world, you bought a CD or a tape and you left the store and the artist or the label or the artist management had no clue what you did. But now, since a lot of people are listening to Spotify or Apple Music or Amazon, and then it's really easy to share what you're listening to, and it's exciting to share what you're listening to with your fans, now data is being generated on, okay, I see how the fans' behaviors are, what their habits are. And so then you can really start to create adaptive marketing strategies for future releases. Additional A&R insights. So I would say that it's not replacing A&R, it's just really enhancing A&R. And you think back to the days, again, before a lot of data was being generated, before a lot of the streaming services, before social media. Think about if you were an A&R person, you got a call from a lead on a band that was in the Midwest. Say you're based in Los Angeles. You really want to go check that band out, so you would fly out to the Midwest. You would show up at a live show. But what if something happened and the band had an off night? Let's say that a lot of people didn't show up because something else occurred. So you really spent a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money going and checking something out that really didn't pan through maybe no fault of the artist or anything else, right? Maybe just something happened. So now I can find out if someone says, hey, you need to go check out this group. I can sit back on my couch. I can get on Instagram. I can get on Facebook. I can go on YouTube. I can check out their website, and I can gain a really, really deep understanding of how the artist is engaging with their fans, what their fan base looks like, how well they are marketing themselves, right? And then if I start reaching out to the artist, they could easily provide me a lot of sales data, a lot of streams data, and I'm already getting that a lot on my own, right? So it's helping really enhance in our insights. And then collaborative and partnership opportunities. So if you have all this data on different genres that we didn't have before, let's say you want to do a collaboration with a different genre. Now you have a lot of data on which genre to pick, because maybe you take a look and a majority of your fan base is in a certain location, or let's say they interact really well on social media, and so does this other fan base. So then you can start really pulling in the data, doing your interpretation, doing your analysis, and bringing forth more collaborative and partnership opportunities. And really, at this point, the sky's the limit, because to be honest, social media is relatively new. I mean, just think about where we're going to be in 10 years, in 15 years, the different types of data that's being generated, in addition to the way that we're all more significantly interacting with digital devices and digital tools. I mean, it's crazy just to think 5 or 10 years down the line, in addition with, right, like machine learning and AI, you combine all this together, and I can't even imagine what's going to happen, within a short period of time. And it's always just going to keep getting better and better and a lot more interesting. So I want to do a quick knowledge check here. So we've talked about data is everywhere, right? We saw how many Google searches have been performed as of today. We saw how much data is being generated by YouTube, like every hour. We understand all the different data sets that we need. So we know that data is everywhere, and a lot of it is massively available to us. And we also know that data analytics is not boring. It is not boring at all. It's super exciting, and it helps us do what? Helps us predict the future. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and put those into the chat. Is that a real background? It is not. It is not. I wish it was. What's the best way to start collecting this data about our fan base? So the question is, what's the best way to start collecting the data about our fan base? We'll go into this a little bit towards the end of the presentation, but I would say the best way would be to make a list of all of the digital sites that your music is on and that you're actively on. So your website, all your social media sites, all of the different DSPs you're on, and who your distributor is. I would start there with that list. And then I would say, okay, what type of data is available from these different digital platforms? I know that Facebook, you can download a lot of data. Same with YouTube. Instagram is a little bit different because you have to make the request to download the data, and then you get a JSON file it's a little bit hard to interpret. So for Instagram, for me, what I've seen work the best is if you just go into the app, you look at your insights. Yeah, even though you're kind of doing a copy and paste there, that's a good way to get the data as well. Data from your website, right? I don't know what web service that you use, but there is a lot of data that's available, like on Squarespace. I know Bandzoogle had a bunch, but again, you want to install Google Analytics on your website. If you haven't done it already, please install that. So yeah, I would definitely just continue to, just make that list, get all your data sets. And then once you have all your data sets, start pulling the data down and just start, taking a look at it in real time and seeing, what you can make sense of. Would be probably the best way to start collecting it. The next question, is there a working job market available for musicians who are interested in DA? Which types of companies would hire us? I would say probably any music label, any artist management company, any distributor. They are hiring people who have DA backgrounds pretty significantly, because they're understanding that all of this data and being able to analyze all this data is extremely important and can provide them insights that they didn't have before. And it can help them, like we just talked about, predict the future. So if they can do it properly, then they're spending less money on the front end and having a more guarantee on the back end. So I would definitely say that probably every music company going forward is going to be looking for that. What are you plugging the DA? Oh, sorry. You mentioned apps that combine social media data and streaming data. Are these apps available for us, or are they strictly created by and for industry insiders? It's a good question. I know that there are a bunch of startup companies out there that are creating these particular types of apps. I don't know any off the top of my head. There's one company called Chartmetric.io, and they do a pretty amazing analysis. They do pretty awesome DA that might be useful for you. But off the top of my head, I can't really think of anyone who's designing an app, but I guarantee that they're out there. It just depends on, how much time you're willing to spend to look into it. What are you plugging the DA into? So really, data analysis is an action. When I'm collecting data, well, when we go through the example at the end, this will become a lot more clear, but I'm really just using a spreadsheet or a database, really, just to take that data to help me kind of visualize it, to help me easily clean it up, and then to really just slice and dice it. What are some examples of data points that you can observe from competitors, similar service providers, musicians on the same genre as you, that may be more established or successful, with the goal of using these? Okay, that's a good question. So some example data points. I think that on Facebook, you can track other pages and see how they're doing against your page. That'd probably be a useful way to see some data about an artist maybe that you're striving to get to their level. I know that on Spotify, you can look at other artists as well on your artist.spotify page and do some comparisons there as well. I would definitely, just do the basics, right? Just think about yourself as if you were a label and you wanted to sign you. Like, what would you look for? You probably go to your Facebook page. You probably go to your Spotify to see how many fans you have. Probably go to your Instagram. Just do a kind of analytics that way. There's a privacy concern, so you're not going to be able to get any really detailed data on anybody else if it's not you. But you can do some of these investigative things for the public data that's already out there, and that's what I suggest that you're doing. There's an app called IndieFlow. There you go. Perfect. I love community. IndieFlow. Check that out. Okay. These are great questions. Okay, so next up, we are going to talk about KPIs, key performance indicators. So what is it? I thought that Clipfolio did a good job of really kind of capturing what a KPI is. So I'm going to read their description to you. So a key performance indicator is a measurable value that demonstrates how effectively a company is achieving key business goals. Organizations use KPIs at multiple levels to evaluate their success at reaching targets. High-level KPIs may focus on the overall performance of the business, while low-level KPIs may focus on processes in departments such as sales, marketing, HR, support, and others. All that's pretty awesome. What does it really mean? It really means a KPI is a measurement or an indicator to tell you how your brand is performing against a key business objective. And what is a key business objective? I'd argue it'd be something like sales numbers, right? How are your sales increasing over time? What's your growth look like? Is it increasing or is it decreasing, right? Key business objectives here. So some other example KPIs we just talked about, right? Sales. So you could say, okay, well, what kind of data would I track? Well, you could start collecting download data, any type of physical sales that you may have had from any vinyl or any CD that you might be putting out. Merch, your online merch store, or even having your merch person put the sales data from the merch table into a Google spreadsheet through their phone, right, while they're selling it in real time. Sales information on show tickets, sales information on licensing, and et cetera. So those are different inputs, different data sets you can use to start tracking your sales. And I would argue that sales growth is a very important indicator for you. Social media, right? So fan engagement, tracking likes, reshares, followers, views, having some type of key performance indicator of fan engagement on your social media is going to tell you how your online performance is doing. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it staying consistent? And then finally here, another key performance indicator I think would be useful for musicians will be tracking your email list over time. So are your subscribers going up? Are you getting more unsubscribes? What's your open rate look like on your emails, right? You always want to try to strive for increasing your open rate through successive emails. What's your click-through rate, right? These are very important metrics that you should be following because these are telling you how people are interacting with your email, how they're interacting with your online presence and how they're interacting with your products. So these are just some example KPIs from a musician's standpoint. So some things to consider, right? So I don't want you to blindly adopt another person or another brand or another company's KPI. It needs to be relevant to you. You're going to have specific goals and indicators, and you're going to have a specific strategy for your brand. So if you adopt another person's indicator and you try to integrate it with your brand, like maybe you can start with theirs to get an idea. What you really need to do is then distill it down so that it associates with your goals and with your brand strategy. It needs to be relevant to you. Now, this is a personal consideration. If you're not familiar with data analytics, I would always start with basic objectives when you're setting up your very first key performance indicators, right? I wouldn't start asking or trying to set up indicators that are extremely difficult to assess, collect data from, interpret, slice and dice to kind of get the analysis that you want. I would always start with basic objectives. And the basic objectives that we talked about in the previous, right? Sales growth over time, social media presence and growth over time, email list growth over time. Those are all very, very basic objectives that are very easy to track with the different data sets that you have. So I'd always start there, start with something easy, and then start, once you get more familiar with the process and you're more familiar with the tools, and then you can start really building out more complicated key performance indicators. But to me, again, simplicity is always key because if it gets too complicated, you might forget what you're looking at or you might not do a calculation correctly. So always start with things that are very basic and very specific. I also want you guys to understand that establishing effective KPIs is an iterative process, right? You might not get it right the first time. You might set up an indicator. You might set up your analysis around that indicator, all your tools, all your templates, and you're running it and you're assessing it week after week. But then maybe in week 3, you realize, oh, I'm looking at the wrong type of data, or, oh, I'm looking at the wrong data point. And that's okay, right? This is an iterative process. So then you change that, right? Or you can always go back because you'll have those data sets from previous, and you can make those tweaks as needed. So if you don't get your KPI right the first time, not a problem. So you want to start asking questions like this when you are trying to define your KPI, because if you can answer all these questions, then you probably have a pretty good indicator to start off with, right? I'm not going to read through all these, but some good questions would be, right, like, what is your desired outcome? What do you want to know from this indicator? You know, why does the outcome matter to you? If it's sales, then I'd argue that that's the bottom line that's going to keep you going, keep your brand growing. So that's very important. How will you know when you've achieved your outcome, right? If you can't define, you know, the way to know if you've achieved your outcome, then why are you asking the question in the first place? If the data isn't there, then there's really no purpose in asking that question. Now, you could maybe put that on a board to take a look at a later point in time, because maybe in the future the data is going to be there, right? But you definitely want to start asking these questions. And so I know we're probably all familiar. If you've attended a couple of my workshops, I always talk about this SMART goal setting, right? Using the SMART acronym to develop your goals. Well, I mean, goals and KPIs go hand in hand. So I would actually use the SMARTER acronym to evaluate your KPIs, right? So is your KPI specific? Is it measurable? Is it obtainable? Is it relevant? Is it time framed, right? Those are the basic SMART questions that we want to ask. And if we answer the questions in the previous slide here, right, all those questions right there, then we probably know that a lot of these, the specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time frame, those are all going to be answered. And then I added the ER at the end, right, the SMARTER acronym, because you want to evaluate and you want to reevaluate, right? Data analytics typically isn't a one and done. It's good to set up templates. It's good to have automated processes to run these templates, but you always want to go back and evaluate and reevaluate, because you want to make sure, you know, as a company, you're going to have pivots in your strategy. So you want to go back every time you make a pivot to make sure that your performance indicators are pivoting with you. And then secondly, you want to make sure, like we talked about, I'm sure you guys are all on board with this, that your KPIs are aligned with your brand strategies, right? And so the use of short-term and long-term KPIs is a very effective strategy, because when you set up goals, you're probably setting up long-term and short-term goals, right? These all go hand in hand. So having an indicator can tell you how, if you're meeting that goal, a short-term or long-term, very useful combination to have, and I would definitely suggest following that. So we've talked about key performance indicators, very high level. Hopefully you guys have a general understanding of how to develop key performance indicators. We could do a whole workshop on those, but just want you guys to kind of have a, you know, understand what the term is and understand kind of the meaning and how to develop them. So now we are going to walk through the data analytics process from start to finish. So what is the process? We first start off with requirements gathering. What do we want to know, and what data do we need? Well, good thing we just talked about KPIs, because those are going to become very important in this requirements gathering process. Then we move out of that process, so we identify what requirements we need and what we want to know. Now we go and we collect the data, so we go and we get it. Where can we source our different data sets from? Once we're done and we got all of our data sets, then we start cleaning, right? We start getting rid of the noise. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're exporting data from a social media site, or let's say from Spotify, there might be additional bits of data within that export that you do not want, or that you do not need to know for a particular KPI that you're analyzing. And so you're going to want to hide those. Now, I said earlier, you don't want to delete those. It's okay to delete them if you make a copy of your master data set, but you always want to have a copy of your original stored somewhere for use at a later point in time, right? Because if you realize that, 2 weeks into an analysis that you were using the wrong data field, but you remembered that the data field that you should be using was available in your master data set, you can just go back and grab that and use that. But if you deleted it, you got to go back to the website, select the date range, download it all again, right? Waste of time. So easy way around that, always make a copy of your original master unanalyzed data sets. So when we move out of the cleaning phase, then we move into the analysis phase. And so in this phase is where we start to slice and dice the data a little bit. We could maybe write some algorithms, write some formulas to help us easier interpret this data in the next step. So this is the analysis phase, right? Getting in there and actually doing the work. Then you move to the really fun phase, or at least what I think is a really fun phase, which is the interpretation phase. In the interpretation phase, this is the phase where you turn data into information. And so we talked about this being an iterative process, right? Maybe you get to this step and you realize that the data that you have doesn't paint the full picture for you. And that's okay. It's an iterative process, no problem. Just go back to your requirements gathering or your collection or one of the previous steps and see if that piece of data that you need to make an accurate interpretation is available, right? And if it's not, that's okay too. Just go back and take a look at your KPI and just make a revision. It's really that simple. And then the final step here is visualization. And so depending, if you have a small data set, if you're not looking at anything iterative, so if you're not trying to analyze data from like week after week after week, so if your data set is small, you don't have a lot. Visualization to me is personally optional. But if you are dealing with large data sets, or if you're continuously tracking things in an iterative basis, then setting up visualizations, so setting up dashboards, is going to help you quickly look and interpret the data a lot easier than if you had to go through a spreadsheet or a database and just look at different lines of data. That's where the visualization is going to really come into play. So I know this is small, I apologize for it, but these are some of the dashboards that you can set up yourself in Google Analytics, and there are so many different ones, right? So we take a look at the pie chart on the right side of the screen. You can see that all blue is new visitors and all green is returning visitors, right? So if I had, let's say my visitor count was like 5,000, it's going to be nearly impossible and very time consuming for me to go through and see who was a new visitor and who was a returning visitor in that 5,000 count. Maybe I could write some formulas to tell me that quickly, but I think that this dashboard right here quickly tells me that information, right? I know blue, oh wow. So if I saw more green, then I would know more returning visitors, right? If I saw more blue, that means more new visitors. On the left-hand side of the screen, it's a visualization dashboard, again, created in Google Analytics of where my user fan base is. So you can see they're heavily in in the United States, and I have other fan bases in China, Russia, Europe, and Canada, and upwards as well, right? So this is where visualization really comes into play. Lots of data or iterative analysis, use dashboards. So now I want to go through another case study with you guys so we can kind of step through the data analytics process here. So the question that we've asked at the very front end of this analysis is, did the acoustic performance of my single on YouTube drive any streams of the studio recording on SoundCloud? So we go through our requirements gathering phase, right? I'd ask first, okay, what time frame are we considering? Okay, let's say we're just considering the past week. The next question I would ask is, where was the video posted? So then we know, okay, we posted the video on YouTube and our website. And we go, okay, how was the content consumed? All right, where, what platform was it consumed on? What date was it consumed on? What were the referral sources to that particular platform? And so then we move into the collection phase, right? So in this phase, we did our requirements gathering. These are the questions that we're asking. This is some of the information that we already know from the campaign. So moving to the collection phase, right? We know YouTube is going to play a big part here. So we know from YouTube, we can get the number of views, geography of views, the watch time, and the referral or traffic sources. We know that from our website, we can get information or data sets such as hits on a page. If we use the tracking URL, or if we didn't, you can still see that from your website. Or if you use Google Analytics, you can definitely see that. And any traffic sources, right? Any referrals or any URLs clicked, perhaps, that you put up on a particular page. So we know we can get that type of data from our website. And then finally on SoundCloud, we know we can get the number of streams, the geography of streams, and the traffic sources. So we know that we can get these types of, this type of data from these different platforms. So then moving to the cleaning phase. And what I put up on the screen here is a screenshot of a video from YouTube. I went into the analytics portion of YouTube, and I can start adding these different tabs, right, that I want to see that YouTube can already start visualizing for me. So video, traffic source, geography, viewer age, viewer gender, date, those are all different data sets that YouTube is giving me. And so now you can hopefully appreciate that, okay, if I download all this data, I'm probably going to get everything that's up on the screen here. I'm also going to get revenue sources, subscription status, subscription source, playlist, and whatever else I have. And so those bits of data aren't going to be very useful, I would argue, at this point in our analysis. So I'd start cleaning that up, right, from our YouTube exported data. I would do the exact same thing with my website, right? I would export the data, take a look at the different fields or the different data points that I need, and then filter out all the others, and then do the exact same thing for SoundCloud. Then I moved into the analysis phase, right? And so this is where I would start consolidating all of my data. And so up on the screen right here, I built this example in Google Sheets. And so what you can see is that I have date, platform, streams on the platform, the location those streams came from, and then the referral sources. And then I do the exact same thing with my website data, and I try to set it up very similarly, right? So I have date, platform, hits, right? That was the difference between our SoundCloud and YouTube data. So we have streams on SoundCloud and YouTube, and we have hits on our website, right? Essentially kind of the same thing in a sense of knowing that someone has actually performed an action to get you that data point. From our website, we also get the location as well as the referral sources. So now we start doing the analysis, and that's where we start slicing and dicing the data, and we start filtering it and looking for peaks and trends. And so here, all I've done was taken my SoundCloud and my YouTube data, and I've filtered it by date, right? So now I know how each platform performed on the same date. And so you can start to see here, oh, okay, on May 11th, I had a spike in my YouTube plays. If you set up filters on your headers, so if you set up a filter on streams and you filtered for descending order, so the highest amount of streams, you would see that at the very top of your list, right? So you can also see that on SoundCloud, you had a significant spike in streams on 12th, on the 13th, and the 14th. And so we are definitely, you're definitely starting to the data is starting to definitely come alive right here. There's a question, so not the location of the majority of the content consumers. Yeah, so I'm trying to keep this relatively simple example, but geography and location for the majority of content consumers, that definitely is something that you want to take into account as well. For the purpose of this example, I did it all from the United States, because if I started adding in different countries and different territories, it'd make the example extremely more in-depth. So I just keep it very, very high level at this point, but absolutely. The location of the majority of the content consumers would be something that you definitely want to focus in on as well for analysis like this. It's a good question. So we can also see here that on the 11th, we had a new source on our YouTube page. It was a YouTube search, right? And then we can also see that SoundCloud, we started seeing more referral sources to our SoundCloud and from our website as well, right? So more referral sources starting to appear as well. This is interesting pieces of data. And then if we take a look at our website data, we're starting to see kind of the same thing here, right? We're filtering by date, and we can see that starting on the 11th, our hits have started to significantly increase. So we're starting to build some of these insights of some of this data. We can also see that our referral sources after the 11th started to increase as well, right? Before it was typically Google searches and social media that drove people to your page. But starting on the 11th, now you have YouTube. And from the 12th to the 15th, let's say now you have SoundCloud as well. So we're seeing more sources, right? So we're starting to interpret more of this data. And now that our analysis phase is complete, we move into the interpretation phase. So we interpret the information and we start to draw conclusions here. So we know that on May 11th, people purposely searched for my video on YouTube, resulting in more plays, right? We can see that clearly right there on the 11th. My YouTube plays started spiking significantly. Before, on average, it was about 100 plays a day, but here I'm at about 100 streams in a day, right? A high amount of plays. We also know that this is when our website hits started to increase, and we also know that hits were coming from new sources, right? So an increase in hits on the 11th, and new source referrals, like we just talked about a second ago, are now coming from SoundCloud and YouTube consistently. We know that 190 SoundCloud plays came from the SoundCloud widget that we embedded on our website. And we know that because the referral source from SoundCloud was website, right? So that was something new that we started seeing here as well. We saw it a little bit back there on the 9th as well, but also here on the 11th, a significant amount of plays. And we also know that on May 12th, we can see that the SoundCloud plays significantly increased and stayed above average. That, again, the plays came from within SoundCloud and from my website, right? So those increase in SoundCloud plays, we did see those spikes. We see that the sources were coming from SoundCloud and our website. So this is important information for us to know as well. And so our conclusion is pretty safe assumption here, is that the YouTube video did help increase streams of our studio recording on SoundCloud. But I said it was a pretty safe assumption. I didn't say it was 100% safe, but that's not 100% accurate because there might be other forces at work, right? There might be other data sets that we didn't account for. Maybe someone, maybe some press picked us up and did a great article on us during that time frame as well that we didn't account for. So starting to pull in additional data sets are going to help, again, really kind of create a clearer picture for us. And if we realize that we forgot about something, again, that's okay. Not a problem at all, right? We can create new requirements, or we can revise our KPIs to more accurately confirm our conclusion. This is that iterative process that I was talking about. It's okay if you don't get it right from the jump. Just go back and rinse and repeat until you do get it right. So visualization. So I didn't do visualization for this particular example, again, because I try to keep it very simple and very basic. And it was over a short time period. We said over a week, right? So it was rather easy to interpret the data in the spreadsheet without visualization. But if I was to visualize or create a visualization, probably what I would do is I would create a graph showing plays versus date versus source from the different platforms. And you would quickly see those spikes, right? That 800 play spike on YouTube, you would quickly see that and you know, okay, I can just start looking into that particular piece of data, et cetera. Same thing that happened on your website with your hits and then on SoundCloud with your streams as well. So that graph would show you that visually. But again, if the data set was larger or if the time period was longer, say we wanted to take a look at a campaign over a 2-month period and we were getting data week after week, or if a more detailed analysis was required, then I would definitely consider using visualization. So now we're going to talk about where can I get the data. So we've talked about, we just ran through the data analytics process from start to finish, a very high level example, but hopefully you guys can see the different steps that we typically take during an analysis. We know that a bunch of data is getting generated, and so we know that we want the richest and the most data sets possible to start really performing an accurate analysis. So where can I get the data? So we all know that we can easily get data from social media, right? Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, we can get all of that data there as well. Actually, YouTube's not social media. Tumblr, let's say it's Tumblr, right? So the one thing I do want you guys to consider, we talked about a little bit earlier, is that some of these sites do not allow you to export or download your data. Facebook definitely does. Instagram does as well. But some of these sites just provide you with dashboards, right? And so that's okay, but that just means if they just provide you with a dashboard, you're gonna have to copy and paste data to perform your analysis. And although that's not still the ideal situation of how to collect data, because that takes a lot more time, it's still important, and you still want to assess those data sets. Aggregators too, right? So some of you have used Hootsuite, Buffer, BeatChain, Sprout Social. That's essentially what they're doing. And when they're providing you analytics, since you've linked up all your social sites to them, all they're doing is they're taking a guess of what they think is going to be important for you to know, some performance indicators that they believe are important for you, and they're going to show that to you. And some of these aggregators, that's not the only thing they do, right? But they do perform analytics. So I just want you guys to, again, just be considerate and just make sure to see if they do allow you to download data or if they only allow you to copy data out of their dashboards, right? So things to consider here. Your website, I don't know if you guys use Squarespace, Bandzoogle, or Wix, or WordPress. All these websites have some basic data analytics built in. But as I mentioned at the very top of the presentation, you really want to install, I would suggest installing Google Analytics on your website. If you have a Gmail account, easy to sign up and to get Google Analytics. It's all free. You can install it on your website. There's a bunch of different instructions on every different website provider that tells you how to install it. And these Google Analytics are pretty powerful. So I would definitely suggest you guys take a look into that and install those on your website, assuming that your website doesn't have a lot of useful data for you right now. Third-party service providers, right? So email marketing services, MailChimp, Sendinblue, Constant Contact, all these have some type of data. I know MailChimp, you can do a download of your data from MailChimp. And I'm sure a lot of you users that are on this webinar right now are probably familiar with how you can get that data, right? How you can download the data. You're probably already using it right now. So that is another set of data that you need to be including in your analysis. And then PR and ad agencies. So any third-party service provider that you may use at any point in time, you're paying for their services. So in theory, they are creating data that you own. So you always want to ask, right? If you enlist the services of a PR agent or let's say an ad agency to help you run some marketing campaigns, you always want to ask them the question, right? Can I get some type of weekly report to tell me what the response rate was? If you guys ran any social media campaigns on your site, in addition to my site, what that data looks like, etc. So you always want to ask there because that's another very rich data set that you can use in an analysis. Tracking URLs, I've talked about these throughout this entire presentation, and although it's a very, very simple concept, tracking URLs are extremely, extremely powerful. I use Berklee quite a bit. There's other providers up there as well. And so if you're not familiar with the tracking URL, essentially what you do is you take your long URL, you put it into a tracking URL service, it'll shorten it for you, and then anytime someone clicks that tracking URL, you can get the click counts, the location, the device that they were on, where they clicked it as well. So just another big data set that you can start using when you're performing different actions that can provide you very, very useful, enriched data down the line when you're performing your analysis. Obviously, streaming services, probably all you guys know that you can get all this data from streaming services and from online video services as well. But again, check because you might not be able to download all the data. You might have to copy and paste it. So always just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. If you can't download it, maybe you're going to have to copy and paste it to get those data sets. And then finally, sales and digital, right? So you're always going to want sales digital as well. So if you use any type of distributor, right, DistroKid, CD Baby, Ditto, TuneCore, you're going to always want to include that data as well, right? Assuming that your KPI is around sales, which it should be, key performance indicator, sales growth, right? And like we just mentioned a little bit earlier, you know, having some type of digital tracking tool for the person at your merch table can be very useful. Let's say you just built a Google sheet, yeah, that's where your inventory is, and then they track sales there. So then you have that data already digitally. Maybe you already set that up in a template that feeds into your data analysis very easily, right? So you can control that. You can control that format. Even getting data from your publisher, right? So if you got a sync on a television show, understanding what the television show is, what the demographic is, when it's going to air, all that type of data is going to be very useful for you as well, depending on what type of analysis you're performing. So knowledge check, right? We have talked about data is everywhere. Data analytics is not boring. We talked about high-level KPIs, how to develop them. We stepped through the data analytics process, and we just went through where I can get the data. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to take a look at some of these questions that came in. So the first question was around tracking URLs. Do they only track the abbreviated URL? Oh, so the tracking URL, even though it abbreviates it, it tracks the actual URL in general. So even though it's an abbreviation, it's really just kind of like a pointer. And so it'll track anytime. So like, let's say you took your website, www.thisismywebsite.com, you put it into a tracking URL. If you use Bitly, you get something back that's like bit.ly/, and then you can customize it. So when you give people that tracking URL, when they click on it, it's going to take them to www.mywebsite.com, and you can get all that information. So extremely, extremely useful. As for newcomer artists with limited amounts of data sets, when does an analysis start to make sense? Great question. I'd say right now, I would say if you have a website, if you have any music online, if you've played a show, if you have any type of online presence, then you should definitely start to perform some analysis, right? I would start, you know, like we talked about a little bit earlier, where do you start collecting the data from? Make a list of all your social media sites, include your website in on that, make a list of all of the digital sites that have your content streaming on them, and then just start collecting all that data, right? I'd say maybe for you, if you're new to this, maybe your first step is, okay, here's my list. Okay, I'm going to go to Facebook. What kind of data can I get? And then really also understanding what the data is telling you, because sites like Facebook, they give you a bunch of data, and some of the data is very interesting to understand, you know, kind of the metrics that they're providing you. So that would be the first step. I'd say make sure you understand what that data actually represents. So you're not making any assumptions. And then do that for every site. Do that for your website. Do that for all your streaming services. Really understand the data. And then once you get done with that exercise, if you really spend time doing that, then you'll start to really see, oh, okay, you're going to start really putting like the full picture together. You're going to start really making sense. So that's definitely where I would start. All right, next question. So the analysis is basically a sentiment analysis, right? What do you mean by sentiment analysis? Could you expand on that for me? Like what they say on social media. Okay, mood, effect. Yeah, so, I mean, you can analyze that. Like if you were, like I liked your website or your song, I would say that's your direct data set. I'm still not sure if I'm understanding the questions here, but it's exactly by analyzing words. Okay. Yeah, so like mood and effects. So now you're starting to talk about creative metadata, and that's starting to get tracked a lot more. Specifically, I know that there's a lot going on in the voice recognition field. So you're like, hey, Google, play whatever. How is Google going to know what to play, right? So that's where you start getting into like this more creative metadata and being able to track it, like mood, effect, how people kind of tag that towards your music. So that's more of the creative metadata, and that's something that I believe is starting to get tracked a lot more now, but I don't know if a lot of that's already available because it's relatively new. That's a good question. Okay, so we got about 20 minutes here. So I want to go through a case study, right? Because there's different ways you can use data analysis, and I've been typically using it throughout this presentation as kind of like a afterthought, right? As, okay, we did this task, how did it do? But you can use data analysis in various different ways. I'm not going to jump into that, but I will jump into a different way that I used it when I was, before I was with Universal. I was with an independent label, and I was tour managing a tour for one of our artists, and we needed to book the tour. So I was like, oh man, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make this successful? How do we want to lessen our risk and increase our chances of having, you know, this be a successful tour? So here's what we did. I'm going to step through this example for you guys where we use data analysis on the front end to essentially help us solve a problem. So the reason we're going on a tour is because we wanted to promote a new album. Some considerations to keep in mind here is that the group had only toured the Midwest. We wanted to target the East Coast because we could hit more cities in the 4-week duration of the tour. And it was over 1 year since the guys did their last tour. So their live draw in the route we essentially wanted to take wasn't high enough to convince a booking agent to book shows for us. So we had to do this all on a bootstrap budget, probably like a lot of you guys have. So we stepped through the data and analysis process, right? Requirements gathering. What do we want to know? What do we need? Okay. So we're going to the East Coast, we're in the Midwest. So the first thing I asked is, okay, what cities from our home city to our destination have more than 100 fans? And then in those particular cities, do we have any super fans? I then wanted to know, how do our streams look in the cities where we have more than 100 fans? How do our streams look in that particular region? Maybe we're not killing it with streams in one city, maybe in adjacent city, we have a huge fan base, right? That's important information to know where we want to book a show. We want to know how our social media numbers look. We want to know how engaged our fans are, right? Because that's going to give us an idea of what route to take, essentially. And then we wanted to also know from a promotion standpoint, because we're going to be creating a one sheet here. This is kind of the whole point of getting this data. Is, has our music been played on college or local radio? That's important information to know. And have we received any press in any of the cities that have more than 100 fans? And if we didn't, maybe about, did we receive press in any adjacent cities, right? Then I started to also want to requirements gather around other artists. So how do we fill out a bill, right? What local artists should we be reaching out to fill the bill for us? So we move into the collection phase, right? We have the requirements gathering. We asked all those questions. So now we need to collect the data, right? So where can we get the data to help answer some of these questions? So we started with social media, looking at fan data, right? Looking at our fan data, also looking at the fan data from the artists that we were considering to be on the bill with us. We looked at, you know, what was their willingness to promote the show? Wanted to see, you know, what was their follower count? How engaged were their fans, right? When was their last show? We do the same thing for the venues in these cities that we have with over 100 fans, right? How does the venue engage with their fan base? You know, are they willing to promote the show? How well do they do, right? Do people rate those venues with a high rating, or do people not like going to that venue too much? A lot of important information that we can collect just from social media. Then I moved to streaming data, right? So I moved to streaming data to get our stats in particular locations. And I also used it to verify artist data, right? Because if I went to an artist page and I saw they had 10,000 followers and I compared that to their online performance as far as streams, let's just say on Spotify, and they had 10 followers, and something is not really equating here, so I can kind of use that to kind of do a sanity check for myself. And then finally, I moved to Google. You probably asked, why'd you move to Google? Well, I did that because I want to also collect data on drive times, gas, food costs, and lodging, right? Because I wanted to also estimate how much it was going to cost us to do this tour. So then I cleaned all the data. I got rid of all the noise, right? I opened up a Google Sheet. I compiled the data from the various sources we just talked about, and I just hid all the fields that I didn't think were important to this particular analysis. And then moved into the analysis phase. So then I used Google Sheets to filter out the highest number of fans in each of the cities. Also used it to filter out our super fans for lodging opportunities. I then used the data to filter top 20 artists in each city based on streams, fan engagement, followers, and last show played. I also used that data and filtered out the top 10 venues based on location, promotion, and fan engagement. And I also was able to calculate gas and lodging costs at these venues to get us there, right, and what it looked like around there. And then I was able to compile our stats, our streams, sales, and followers, and I filtered those stats down to the most impressive stats that we had. And so then we moved into the next phase, the interpretation phase. So after being able to have all that data, collecting it, cleaning it, filtering it down, now I'm moving into interpretation. So my interpretation was I could create 2 tour routes. I was able to use the data that I analyzed to craft a compelling story with our data, right? Because I used that to create a one sheet that I would send out to supporting acts, to talent buyers, and to promoters, because more often than not, it's going to be the first time that we were in their city. And so I really need to convince them that, hey, you guys need to let us play. The show's going to be awesome. And then, like I was saying earlier, I created a budget, and then I used the data from our super fans, and I reached out and I was like, hey, we're going to be coming to your city. Could we stay with you? You know, as a way to save a little bit of money on the back end. And then once I started the reach out, after I performed the analysis to actually lock in one of the 2 tour routes, I used the tracking URLs, right? Because then I knew if someone was actually clicking the link to get to our EPK page, I created a brand new EPK page and cleared the counts, so I knew who I sent it out to. And I use those tracking URLs to really telling people we're opening up our emails and, you know, going to our page and checking us out, right? So I created the data there to help me put the picture together on the back end. So looks like I got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to go through this last one pretty quickly, and then I'll move into the exercise. So I'm bad at math, right? Aren't we all? Good news is, no big deal. There are so many tools at your disposal, and a lot of these are free. So like what's on the screen right there, that's an old school calculator. I'm sure some of you still have those. I know I still have mine. That one's a solar one. That's pretty neat. But some of these tools, right? Calculator, that's used tool. When you do math, you know how to use calculator. Excel, if you use any Microsoft products, then you have access to Excel. I'm sure all of you have used it probably during your academics. So that's a free tool to use. Well, free if you own Office. Google Sheets, you have a Gmail address. You have instant access to Google Sheets, which I like to refer to as Excel Lite. So you can always use Google Sheets to do your analysis. Airtable is an online database that you can use as well. You can sign up for a free account, and you have some limitations with a free account, but it's useful, right? Maybe you like working in databases more. If you just Google search free spreadsheet, a bajillion and one different spreadsheet downloads and free tools will come up. So these are all out there at your disposal. And the next thing I want to mention here is you always want to set up templates, right? So if you produce music, then you know the power of templates. If you are having to do the same thing over and over again, then you should just really consider setting up a template so you only have to do that step once. And if you can export data from a site, more often than not, they are not going to move around how that data is being exported out of their site. And they're typically not going to remove data from those exports. So I say that because you're always going to be more often than not getting a consistent product. If you're getting a consistent layout and format in the data that you're exporting from these sites and download your data, you don't have to copy and paste it, then it'll always go into your data analytics template the same And so if you just download, copy and paste stuff in, if the format's always the same, then all your analytics, all your equations you've already set up, those always be the same as well, right? So definitely recommend using templates. Okay, so the final knowledge check, I'm gonna blow through this one. We're gonna go through creating a template. So now I want you guys to take all the knowledge, all the stuff we talked about for the last hour and 20 minutes. We're gonna bring it all together. Bring it all together here. Okay, so this is a very important KPI I think that you guys should have. If you're starting off in your career, the question I got asked earlier, I'm a very new musician starting off my career, this is one thing that you want to focus in on. Make this your first indicator. Follower growth over time. So let's step through the process around data analysis of this key performance indicator. So requirements gathering, what do we want to know? What data do we need? So we need to be specific, and we're very specific if we say we want to measure follower growth over time. So measuring follower growth, that's a specificity. Is it measurable? It is measurable, right? This is the direct data we talked about at the very beginning of the workshop. We can get this data, we can see follower growth through our social, through streaming information, and through our email list. Is it obtainable? Yeah, thanks, DA. It is obtainable. If I know how to use data analytics, and I definitely know how to measure my follower growth over time since I already know the data sets that I need to use. Is it relevant? 100%, because you always want to see your follower growth go up. Starts to do this, that's a bad sign. And if it stays pretty consistent, I mean, I guess if you're Drake, maybe that's fine, but a lot of us want to always see it do this. We want to see it go up, right? So definitely is relevant. Time frame, I would say get the data on a bi-weekly or a weekly basis, depending on how your workload is. Every 2 weeks works well for me. Some people get this data on a monthly basis. It really just depends on how quickly you want to react to what this indicator is going to be telling you on the back end. So moving to the collection process, where can we get the data? So what data sets do we need? Any social media sites you're active on, those are going to provide you data sets, and you need to get those data sets. Make a list of all the social media sites that you are, and I say active because if you sign up for a MySpace account back in, I don't know, the early 2000s, obviously no one's ever using it, so don't include that in the list, right? Just the ones that you're currently active on. Streaming. All sites that have your music or streaming audio or video. So if it's on Spotify, if you went through CD Baby and you just had them push it through all the distributors in different territories, then you know maybe that's where you get that streaming data from, is from your distributor, right? You also want to then enrich that data set with Spotify, with Apple Music, with wherever else your music is on. And then finally, your email service, right? Making sure that you get the data set from your email service. So let me go through the cleaning process, getting rid of the noise. So here I would create a spreadsheet for a lot of us. Google spreadsheet, fantastic, easy to use, right? Showed it a little bit earlier. I would import all the tabs from the various data sets, or excuse me, I'd import all the data sets onto various tabs, right? And I'll show you that, the reason why you want to do that here in a second. And then you want to create a master tab that has perhaps like date range, platform, total followers, subscribers, and then your increase in followers, subscribers, and your decrease as well. So here's a basic example, right? So you can see down there at the very bottom, I have all of my Facebook data in the second tab. In the third tab, I have all of my Instagram data, and then following is Spotify, Bandcamp, and email. And the reason why I suggest you guys do this is because when you're performing your analysis on this master tab, what I'm doing here, as you can see in cell C3, is I'm referencing data from my Facebook tab, right? So during the cleaning phase, I'm hiding data in all these different tabs, but I'm not deleting any data, and I'm letting the data live in its own spreadsheet, right? So each of these new tabs is a spreadsheet instance. And so then you just want to essentially make references to those different tabs in your spreadsheet to kind of tell you the data that you need here, right? So we have the date range, platform, total subscribers, our plus, and our additions and our unsubscribes as well. So moving to the analysis phase, right? You start to write algorithms, you start to filter and slice and dice the data. And so what I've done right here is I've done a little bit of visualization during this analysis as well. So what I did here, because I know for me, I like to see percent difference, right? So just because I got 72 subscribers this particular 2-week period, I want to see what is the percent difference against my total subscribers. So I would go in here and I'd create another column, write an equation that tells me the percent difference of new subscribers to my total. And then I would do the exact same with how many unsubscribes that I have, right? The percent difference there. And then I would bring it all together and say, what is the overall percent difference? Because just because I've lost 5, if I've gained 200, that's gonna not be too bad. But if I've lost 3 and I've gained 1, right, that's a different story. So what I also did here when I talked about visualization, right? So I did some conditional formatting. You can do it in Google Sheets or in Excel. If anything, my percent difference was greater than 0, I turned the text green. If it was less than 0 or 0, I turned the text red, right? If it was a negative percent difference. So this was just my way of performing a little bit of visualization. But as we talked about earlier, since this is kind of a reoccurring analysis, you're going to definitely want to set up dashboards, right? So moving into the interpretation process. So again, the reason why I set the percent differences up was so I could get a quick glance about my growth and my reduction. And then the very last column was the overall percent difference, which provided me the roll up. Positive growth means that you're doing something right. And the adverse means you need to assess an issue, right? Easy to follow. Plus is good, minus is bad, right? And then establishing average growth and then performing analysis on date range where the growth or reduction was significant, right? So we see on average, you're getting 50 new likes or 50 new follows each week, then that's your average. But say one week you had 500 follows, then, you know, that's going to peak. You're going to say, oh, I need to perform some analysis, seeing what in the heck happened right there. And I want to try and definitely repeat that, right? So knowing an average growth number is always good. It's always good as well. And then moving to the visualization phase, so we talked about it. This is reoccurring data sets. We want to visualize it. And so here are some visualizations that I would come up with, right? So overall percent difference. So I'm calculating my additions to my followers, my subscribers, to my removals or my unsubscribes. And you can quickly see in this graph that on the weeks of 5/3 to 5/17, I had a super big spike in increases. And you can also quickly take a look at this graph and see that although you did have some unsubscribes, that the overall was not a negative number, right? Because that yellow line is your overall percent difference, which you really want to pay attention to, and it's always majority of the time on the positive side of the 0. And then secondly, your follower count, right? So I would do another visualization like this, my increase and decrease in followers. I can see that between 419 to 52, I lost a lot of followers on Instagram, but on 419 to 52, I gained a bunch of followers on Bandcamp, right? So that's kind of the power in visualization of data, that you can quickly take a look and make actions, make decisions very quick. And again, these are useful when you have big data sets, you have reoccurring data analysis. So yeah, we did it. 3 minutes to spare. Opening it up for Q&A. What do you guys got? Oh, thank you, Juan. That's so nice of you. Have I blown you guys' mind? Will the age segment of followers affect on who do we want to target? Yeah, I would say probably another indicator, or I think you really need to understand your demographic. And understanding your demographic is going to be understanding what the age range of your demographic is, like the highest demographic count. So I would definitely say that that's an important piece of data. The different types of data you get, younger audiences prefer. Yeah, exactly, right? So understanding the age segment, you know, that's going to really come to light when you're taking a look at your social media data, because you're probably going to see a lot between like the 18 to 34-year-olds. That's typically a big range for pop music. And it would definitely affect who you want to target, because if you're doing a marketing campaign and you know that you have a younger age group, then you're not going to want to look for collaborations with brands that really apply to a different age group or a different type of demographic. So those are definitely important pieces of data to know. Yeah. Are targeted ads on Facebook worth the money? It's a good question. I'd ask the question back to you saying, is Facebook, are you very active on Facebook? Are your fans very active on Facebook? And worth the money, what does that mean? Is $10 worth 10 followers? Is $100 worth 10 followers? Really got to ask those questions as well. But targeted ads, you know, that's exactly what Facebook is, right? Is that they created Facebook so they could sell your data to have very targeted ads. And that's the whole point of kind of data analytics. You can really kind of drill down and start targeting too. So it's really up to your brand and how much you consider, you know, kind of quantify what worth the money means. Good question though. Thanks, Nicholas. Appreciate you. Can you spend a little time talking about the importance of relating data to business goals? It's kind of easy to find the buttons on data, but tying it back to how it might be meaningful for folks is more of a meaty element. Importance of relating data to the business goals. Yeah, so essentially the way to think about it is I always recommend setting up long-term and short-term goals. And so a goal is exactly what it means, right? You always have that goal post in mind. And so you want to know if you're reaching that goal. And so you set a performance indicator up for each of your goals that essentially looks at different pieces of data associated with that goal. And you essentially track that on a recurring basis to make sure that you're meeting that goal. So like one example, it could be just what we walked through. How does my follower count look? So if you set up a goal, let's say your short-term goal was, I want to increase my follower count on Instagram by 50 followers within a month period. So I would say, okay, great. So that's your goal. So your indicator is going to be, what does my follower growth look like over that month period? And so you're going to want to start looking at your Instagram data, right? You want to see what that growth is over time, how many subscribes, how many unsubscribed, essentially kind of what we just went through with that previous example. I want to set something similar, like up to that, because then that's going to help you, right? Tell you if you're reaching that goal. And if you set your goal post up for at the end of this month, I want to hit that target, then you probably want to do this analysis probably on like, you know, every couple of days. You want to start gathering data and start seeing how you're doing. And so just gathering that data is good to tell you how you're performing on that goal, but then you also need to start thinking about, okay, what am I doing on top of this, right? And really reanalyzing. So say you put up a Facebook post, you're like, or excuse me, an Instagram post, and you got 2 subscribes, so you got 2 new followers. That's great. You get, okay, so you go to the next one, put up another post, and you got 15. So you're starting to see the trend go up. So in addition to saying, okay, I'm starting to reach that goal through that indicator, you're also going to want to start thinking about, okay, how did I create that post, right? What was it that made this have so many more likes, or that I gained so many more followers off this post? And then I'd argue, okay, so let's go in and do an analysis of exactly why that occurred, right? Maybe it was something exciting to your fans. Maybe it was something that you did. Maybe you released a single, and that's maybe why you saw a spike there, right? So just seeing that one set of Instagram data is not going to really help you, but when you bring in those additional data sets like sales, streamings, in addition to social, some email data, that's going to really help you understand kind of what's really occurring. And that's really how that performance indicator is going to relate to the goal, and then how the data relates to that performance indicator. I presume some long-term followers may become inactive or abandon their account, but they won't show up as lost followers. Do you have metrics strategies for tracking that? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say really engagement, because you could argue that if a person, you know, maybe they subscribe to your page, your Instagram profile, but they haven't been active on Instagram. So you can really start looking at that engagement metric and saying, okay, how much engagement am I getting? If I have 5,000 followers, but every post I put up, maybe it only gets 2 or 3, then I'm not really engaging my fans. So then I'd want to go back and I want to actually, right, take a look at why these posts aren't engaging my fans. So that's kind of a way of looking at it, would be engagement, not just necessarily followers as well. Okay, a lot of questions here. All right, what's the next one? Can you explain the ER part of this smarter checklist using the example? Oh, follower growth over time. How would you evaluate and reevaluate? So I think that I use that example because that one is pretty straightforward. That's all through direct data. We get all that, pretty much all through direct data, we can get that information. But some indirect data might be like seeing or paying attention to how your content is being reshared. You can start gathering a little bit of data like that now, but really kind of putting on your detective hat and trying to see, you know, some of these indirect data signals would probably be a good way to start looking at the reevaluating that KPI. But that particular one, I think, is pretty straightforward. So you might not need to really reevaluate there. Maybe, okay, wait, here's an instance. Maybe you picked the wrong piece of data to use from your distributor. Maybe you didn't use like the right set of data. So you're in week 3, let's say you're doing your evaluation of your data set over a month. Your distributor sends you information every week. Week 1 looks good. Week 2 looks good. Week 3, your distributor changed something and you're relying on templates. And so you just saw a significant decrease in streams. So at that point, you'd say, okay, I need to reevaluate what's going on here. So you would start saying, okay, what was the big decrease in? Start going into that tab, finding out which tab it was in that master spreadsheet, and then really dialing in and saying, oh, okay, I'm glad I reevaluated this because I'm using the wrong field now because my distributor changed their format. How much time or percentage do you spend personally on forecasting on this whole DA process? Is that one of your main goals, or is your focus forecasting? So I spend a lot of my time when I'm performing DA on the requirement section because I want to make sure that I'm asking the right questions. There's been so many instances where I've asked questions that I thought I had the right data to, but when I got into the analysis portion, I was always missing like the one final connecting piece. And you can make assumptions, but I would definitely stray away from making assumptions, especially if your assumption and the result of it's going to be spending less or more money. So I really spent a lot of time on the requirements gathering phase to make sure that I'm asking the right questions, that I have access to the right data, that it's the right indicator for the goal, that it's actually going to be benefiting my strategy to monitor this particular indicator. So that's where I spend majority of my time is there on the front end. And if you're working on a team, then you definitely want to, you know, once you create an indicator, you want to go and talk to the rest of the team. Hey, what do you guys think? This is what I'm doing. What do you guys think? And get that different input, because maybe one of your team members thinks that something else is more important, or maybe they have a different way of looking at something, right? So getting a different perspective is always useful if you have a team, but I always spend the majority of my time on the analysis portion. And I honestly think that the interpretation portion, or excuse me, on the requirements gathering, and the interpretation portion is what gets me super excited, and the analysis, because I am a nerd. I love math, but that's just me. Okay. I really want to thank everybody so much. If you're in the Midwest, if you're on the East Coast, it is so late. Even if you're on the West Coast, it's pretty late. But I really want to thank you guys for taking the time and jump into data analytics with me today. If you have any follow-up questions, you can email me here. I have no problems. I will always get back to you guys. And I know that we didn't dive super deep into DA, but hopefully now you guys know that DA is not boring. And you guys know that it's super powerful and everyone should be excited about it. So thank you guys so much again.